my mother-in-law opening the book and going, oh my goodness, it's like a centerfold. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose land we are chatting this afternoon. And storytelling is as old as time, as we pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. We've always told stories, and this is ours to tell now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we are aging, we are lucky. It means that we're not dead. We're still here. And as you and I started to kind of hit those milestone years, looking around for information, realizing that it wasn't all in one place, we couldn't get the stories, the resources that we were after, so we just had to make it ourselves. And here we are. So we really wanted this to be the what to expect when you're expecting, but instead of pregnancy, for aging.
Well, it sort of came, didn't it, from I was turning 50 and everyone kept saying to me, how do you feel about it? I'm like, what do you mean, how do I feel about it? It's a birthday. I'm lucky. It's great. And I realised there were so many expectations from society on a milestone birthday that I hadn't necessarily thought about. And that then took us down the path of, we did a podcast, Age Against the Machine, which was this fascinating deep dive into everything that is associated with getting older. And then the book let us take it to the next step.
Absolutely. I think that, for me, and in the conversations that we were having, looking for inspiration, looking for aspiration, it was really hard to find pathways or models that I felt like represented something that we wanted to mimic. I really want my 60s to look like that, or my 70s to look like that. And so we started really searching for examples of women that were doing it the way that we wanted to do it. And I think that that's why we had to bring it all together in one place.
But also information. We just wanted information, like what on earth is going on and what's happening to our bodies and our faces and our hair and our life and our work and our future and all of those questions that we had, I think we've asked, and they're in this. But it was lucky that I feel like we had such a great process writing together because we've worked together for so long. You being the most extraordinary producer I've ever worked with. We've had so many trips around the world doing stories, and we've always said that between us we make up 100% of the brain. Some days I'm only 10%, you're 90. Other days we're 50-50, but it kind of came together.
Most days it's 50-50, absolutely. But going back, to the experiences that we've had together around the world, I think that when we sat down to write this book, it was so important to us to be representative of the women that we've met all around the world. Not just in the work that we've done together, with Channel 7 Sunday night, but also with World Vision, our own travels, my background in the Middle East. We really wanted, women's stories and how women approach aging, not just from our own backyards and our own circles of friends, but from, as much of a range of voices and experiences as we could. And I'm really proud of the range that we have represented.
Yeah, I feel like we were very aware as we wrote it that we're coming from a place of privilege. We are two educated, healthy white women living in Australia, and we have all the factors to make our ageing experience as positive as it could be, which was just a reminder constantly through the book that everyone's experience with ageing is so very different. And, the life you've led up until this point really determines your future.
Absolutely. And that not all women are aging equally, not within Australia, not around the world. But I think, again, going back to, that comparison, yes, on the one hand, as, privileged women in a developed country, we have access to the tools if we want them to age in a certain way. But I also found that it was women from, other parts of the world, maybe less developed countries, who had less fear around aging. I think it's very much a Western cultural attitude that we've discovered that puts that anti-aging pressure on women. And I really drew a lot from the women who live within communities, contexts where they're not asked to hide or be afraid of getting older, and rather to celebrate it.
They live in communities where being older is respected. It's seen as having wisdom and amazing attributes, whereas we kind of frown on it. But we wanted it to be packed with information, so we've broken it into 3 sections. So the first one I found, look, it's all encompassing and it was such a deep dive. It's called Selves. That's where we talked about what happens to your body, good and the bad, what happens to your mind, what happens to your face, what happens to your feelings, your mental health, your emotions. What did you learn when we were writing that section?
To be honest, I think what I'm most proud of is that this book is not only full of stories, personal stories, but very informative resource. So I'm not going to be able to sit here and rattle off different hormones or the different parts of our DNA, but that information is in this book, and I'm so happy it is. So you can refer to it when you need it. But what's really stuck with me is information about lifespan. You know, once we get past this fear of aging, we dispense with that and we recognize that getting older is a privilege. Then we start drilling down into, well, what does that look like? How long is a good, healthy, long life? In Australia, if you're a white Australian woman, you are living 10 years on average longer than if you are an Indigenous Australian woman. And that's 10 years of life. That's 10 years of time with your family, with your grandchildren, with your pets in your garden, living your life. And that's just unacceptable. And I think, again, coming back to that idea of not all women are aging equally when it comes to our bodies, when it comes to ourselves, access to healthcare, access to nutrition, you know, these kinds of things are, I think, the kinds of, these are the things that I think all of us should be activated about on behalf of each other. Yeah. You know, that idea of the sisterhood and the rising tide, it applies to our health as well.
I liked the bit about the power of connection and how as you get older, your friendships change, people come and go from your life, but you need to stay engaged. And I think, you know, when we wrote about families, and for me, it was that sandwich generation between caring for aging parents and then caring for your children and going through the empty nest syndrome, which at the time of writing, as you know, our eldest, Nick, left home. That was really hard. I felt quite emotional at that point in writing it, and it just felt really, I was living it. And I look around at my girlfriends, and that's what we're looking after our parents. You know, the balance has shifted. Suddenly you feel like the parent. And, you know, these children that you spend 20 years nurturing and looking after are suddenly like, yep, I've got this. Bye, Mom, I'm out of here. Yeah. That's really hard. So, yeah, I'm sure we're not the only ones.
No, I mean, I have reached for our book and the interviews and the conversations that we've had with experts and women for my own life throughout the process of writing it. My own parents in the last couple of months have gone through health challenges, some health scares, thinking about what the next couple of decades of their life looks like and what's my role and how do I help prepare them? How do I prepare myself for all of these things? How do I advocate for them within the healthcare space? I have reached for our book numerous times to be reminded, even just for language, you know, how do I phrase a question? What's the best way to approach this? There's so many invaluable resources. I think something else that I'm very proud of in the Our Selves section is talking candidly and frankly about sex and intimacy.
Okay, so you were way more candid and natural during this chapter.
Yes.
Yes. There's a diagram in the book. Let's tell everyone the story of the diagram.
The story of the diagram. So Mel already mentioned that we have this ability to share our brain. Very rarely across many, many stories and projects, I would say, have we locked horns or crossed swords. And I wouldn't say that's what happened here, but I felt very strongly that there needed to be a diagram of the female genitalia in our book because the research tells us that most women cannot locate and label the different parts of their own body. And as we get older, not just for sex, but for health as well, it's important to know what our lady bits are all about. You, on the other hand, weren't so sure you wanted.
I was like, I don't want my mother-in-law opening the book and going, oh my goodness, it's like a centerfold.
My father-in-law did open the book and he said, something's winking at me. But your suggestion, which was hilarious and has changed my relationship to Italian food ever since, was, can't we just have a picture of a tortellini? So we went with an actual diagram of an actual vagina.
But now every time we have tortellini, we laugh.
I can't eat tortellini anymore. It's ruined for me. But yes.
That quote should never be used again. No, but it was, and I think that's the whole, we just had to look at everything. There's good bits with aging, obviously, because the alternative no one wants. But there are things that are really traumatic and really, really challenging. Then we looked at the aesthetics, you know. I mean, for a lot of people, getting older is how you look and what you suddenly see in the mirror, in photos and in wrinkles and grey hair. And so we learned about vampire facials, which was fascinating. But I think that was really interesting to say, okay, if you choose to do something, if the outside no longer matches the inside, what can you do? But if that's not the path you want to go down, that's okay. Let's celebrate it. I liked it. We spoke to Dr. Julie Malone, who said, if you are going to do something, just make sure the decision comes from the right place, that you're doing it for you, not for society or not because you're trying to fix something that probably can't be fixed. So I think, you know, we had to acknowledge. And don't you feel like now I see so many more photos of, you know, Andy McDowell on the red carpet with grey hair. And I don't know, there's just, women are owning it now.
Absolutely.
We don't have to hide away.
I do feel like our little baby, our book is being launched into a time where we are having these conversations much more frequently, still not as much as they should be, but the visibility of this conversation of women choosing to age in different ways. I think that the tide is turned, and even just in terms of the language of anti-aging, we're just getting a little bit over it, aren't we? Yeah.
Why would you be anti it? It happens.
What's the alternative?
It's natural. Yeah.
Exactly.
I wish there was more positive aging or whatever term, but that's a pet
Even
hate of
aging
ours.
gracefully has gotten a little problematic because it's as if we're meant to just be hiding in the corner knitting, which might be your thing, but you know, there are so many more models and pathways, and I think that we present them all. Yeah.
I feel like we've also discussed a lot of topics that aren't necessarily openly talked about.
There is no part of our life that isn't impacted by growing older. And yet, for some reason, so many things are still considered so taboo or so private. But if we don't share our stories with each other, we don't know that there's resources or that other people are experiencing what we're going through. And one of the stories that one of our beautiful contributors shared was about sex and intimacy after loss, after becoming a widow, or after, you know, experiencing a dramatic change to your body, perhaps from cancer or these health things that do happen to us as we grow older. And it's such a delicate and tender, but very human and possibly predictable part of getting older. And I'm so glad that we can highlight those stories and that people can say, oh, yes, you know, this idea of should I allow myself to have sex, to have pleasure after loss or after grief is a conversation that I think more people should be having. And I'm so happy that we've prompted it here.
Section 2 is called Our World, and that's where we look at everything to do with women and money, women in power, women in, in employment, women in work. I think probably one of the most confronting moments for us was when we spent time with Sam, who's a woman of my age, blonde, mum of 2, who found herself in a financial predicament where she was homeless and she was living in her car. She was still holding down a job, so she couldn't get the financial assistance that she would be entitled to if she wasn't working, and she needed to keep her job, but she was sleeping in her car. And I think it's knowing how many women can potentially fall through the cracks that was such a confronting thing. We learnt that stat early on that, you know, single women over 50 is the fastest growing group of homeless in this country. That just broke my heart. You know, you've got a whole generation of women who've done the right thing, who might have married and had children and worked and then found themselves in a situation where their life was completely changed. And like Sam, they're living in their car. And I think that was something that was really important for us to talk about. Why does it happen? Why is there still an imbalance in working laws? Why is there still a gender pay gap? Why do women retire with less superannuation than men? Why is women's income security so much less, women's income security and work security so much less than men's? And I think that was pretty startling, pretty sad.
Oh, absolutely. And outraging and activating. And I think my life has been impacted by Sam's story and by that experience in the sense that I have completely changed the way that I talk about money and work with my girlfriends. You and I have changed the way that we talk to each other about what we might be earning on a certain project or this or that, because if we don't share this kind of information with each other, if we don't talk to each other actively about how we're doing financially. Somebody like Sam, her friends and family didn't even necessarily know that she was living out of her car. There's so much shame, so much disappointment, or a sense that, this is my fault. But if along the way we are able to kind of put our hand up and say, I'm a little worried about my retirement, or I'm not doing so great at the moment, what can I do? I guarantee you the women around you have resources, information, or can put you on the right track. And so, yeah, just this idea that these topics, are so taboo, I think is something that we really have to change.
We delved into women in work, and, that when a company downsizes, women over 50 is the first group that is let go, which just breaks my heart. I mean, suddenly you find yourself, your kids are older, you've got time on your hands, you're more experienced, you've got all the skills, and you're out of work. So we looked at, what can you actually do? How do you reclaim it? And also finding a new purpose. How do you reinvent yourself, if that's what it is? How do you re-educate yourself? What can you do to stay relevant, to find, I guess, a new direction, if that's something that has to happen at that point in life? And also, how do you actually do it? Because it's daunting at any point, let alone if you're older in the workforce and surrounded by, all these cool young things that speak in a language that you just don't understand.
Absolutely. And I think that what we learned is that we have to not only advocate for ourselves, but advocate for each other, right? And we need allies within other segments of society. This is where we need men to step up. This is where we need men to read the book. You need everybody in the system, in an employment structure, to be prioritizing not just older women, but older people in general, valuing that knowledge and experience that only comes with time. And the statistics and the data don't stack up. We are just as capable of onboarding new information, of retraining, of learning new things, of pivoting to something new as we grow older as anybody else. And yeah, those opportunities need to stay present.
I loved what we learned in the Women in Power section. So we spoke to Julie Bishop, who talked about, holding the positions that she did and having the influence that she did. But then we spoke to unofficial leaders, matriarchs in their society. Joyce Saunders, a First Nations mum who's got this incredible role within her community, an African queen in Ghana who is an unofficial leader, but my gosh, she has an impact on the community around her. I found that really interesting, that as you get older, you can choose to take on that matriarch role. And we see it in society here with whether it be mentoring, whether it be, offering support to younger women in a workplace. I really enjoyed exploring all those areas.
Well, that comes back to one of the core questions that guided this process for us, which is, what is the difference between becoming an elder or becoming elderly? And I think that all of those examples that you mentioned, the women we spoke to whose fundamental roles in their families, communities, their governments, their countries, is because they're older, not in spite of being older. And that, I think, is what we've come to think of as stepping into becoming an elder, stepping into that position of being an elder versus becoming elderly, which many people might define that word in a positive light. But I think, at least in my experience and what we've learned through writing this book, is that being elderly is that invisibility, is that, being dismissed and kind of, put in the corner, which I just think we're not willing to do anymore.
Oh, no.
Yes. No, we have too much to offer. Absolutely. I think that, something else that came out of the Our World section, talking about power, money, access, essentially, is the idea that we can't wait for this problem to fix itself. No one's necessarily going to come in and do this for us. We have to be the ones to make the change and put the, I guess, safety nets in place to make sure that we're safe and cared for. And there's a group of women in Australia, but it's popping up all over the place, that are really engaged in the idea of co-housing. And I think it's such an ingenious, creative solution. Who amongst us hasn't said to a group of girlfriends, when we get older, let's, all buy a big house and live together? But these women are actually doing it because they're looking at the wage gap. They're looking at the issue around women and houselessness, housing insecurity. They're looking at, the health issues that women face often on their own, and deciding to pool their resources. And it's that kind of activism, taking action, supporting each other that I think we just need to see so much more of.
And of course, the fabulous Tina Arena sharing her story. That ARIA speech, remember when she got up and she said, you know, I'll choose when I step down, not when radio stations decide to no longer play my music because I'm getting older. That sense of owning your power, of knowing who you are, of getting to a point in your life where you are defiant. You've worked really hard and damn it, you're going to hang on to that platform. She was fantastic. So, we're talking about ageism, and there is so much ageism in society, in the workplace, but most importantly, what do you do about it? You know, there's tools in there. We've spoken to experts. What do you do? Who do you talk to? What help can you seek? How do you have somebody else join that fight with you? And there's a lot of fights to be had in aging.
Joan Nessel. Joan Nessel is one of our contributors. She is in her 80s. She has had a long life and career of, shoe leather activism, really kind of in and amongst it. And she hasn't stopped. And that's her advice really for all of us, is that when history comes knocking, you answer the door. No matter what your age, you find what it is that you have to offer. You throw your voice, you throw your weight into the fray. And I think that that's just so interesting, so important, this idea that we actually need to be out there as visible as we can be for that next generation of women as well to see. I mean, visibility is a really interesting idea that comes up through all of this work, and not everybody sees it as a bad thing, do they?
But I love Joan. I think she was probably, not that you want to have a favourite, Joan, I think, inspired the both of us. She is now in her mid to late 80s, would I say, and she's losing her friends, and that's what happens. And I liked her thought where she said she feels like she's standing on a mountain looking around and is so grateful for all of the people that got her to where she is, and she thanks them. And I loved that sense of never forgetting anybody that's been there on your path as you get to the point where you are today. And she was remarkable.
Absolutely.
What a woman.
And that kind of brings us to section 3.
Yeah. That was a really important conversation to have. We don't talk about death and dying. We don't talk about the end of our life, whether it be our own or someone we loved, because, I don't know, I feel like it's just too sad. Sometimes you just don't even want to acknowledge it, but it's part of life.
It is. And, it is one of the givens of growing older that, the longer that our lives are, every year that we're blessed with, we're going to lose people along the way. We're going to farewell people that we love, and we're going to have to prepare for our own mortality. And I think that bringing that conversation out of the shadows, demystifying it. I mean, you and I had some really challenging conversations around that. I think that that topic was really triggering for you in a lot of ways.
You don't want to acknowledge that the people that you love will ever leave you, will ever die, but they will. So we need to think about it and talk about it. Yeah, I find that really hard.
Yeah, and it's like anything in life, though, isn't it? That the more you prepare, the more information that you have, the more that you arm yourself with knowledge, the less scary something is. And I think one of the offerings that we have in the book, for example, is a very succinct and useful checklist, an end-of-life checklist, questions to ask yourself about what you want your last days to be like, what you want your funeral or memorial to look like, who gets the proverbial china, right? But these are things we actually have to talk about and think about while we can. And the more choices that we make while we can make those choices, I think the more we can exhale and breathe into that part of our lives and that unavoidable part of our lives.
And I liked the tone that some of the women we spoke to from other communities around the world and other cultures who said that it's actually a celebration. When somebody passes, it is this, dare I use the word joyous, but celebration of who they were and their life and what they did, rather than, I always think for our perception is it's just a sad, sad time. I think that was something I learned and that really resonated with me.
Absolutely. But that the sadness comes, right? And that's, I think, the beauty of our chapter on grief. And, the women that we spoke to about their approaches to grief and how they understand grief, you have to make space for it. You have to sit side by side with it. But again, just like mortality, if we prepare ourselves for grieving, if we know that we don't get through this life without loss, for all that we gain, for all the gifts of growing older and a rich, full life, things fall away, things come to an end. And it's like any other skill, right? I think that's what I've learned from our beautiful contributors and the women who've shared their own grief stories with us, is that it's going to happen. And that the more that we can just prepare ourselves, have some skills at the ready, the better we'll go.
Well, I learned from Victoria Spence, amazing, holistic, private funeral director, on how much control you can have over your final days and then your funeral. It doesn't have to be one of those, yep, get into the chapel, have the service, get out in 30 minutes, the next one are coming through, that you can actually take more control over how it will be, and that didn't you say the grieving process, how that will help those who are grieving?
Isn't that so interesting?
Yeah, she taught us a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Another really important lesson from all of this research and writing is that even while we might find talking about mortality to be off-putting or a little bit scary, that once you get to a certain age, they're thinking about it. Our parents are thinking about it. Our older aunties and uncles, they're thinking about it. And so being someone who can raise your hand and say, if you ever want to talk about the end, the end of your life or your decisions or your fears or your choices, I'm here and available for that conversation, is something that I really feel I came out of this experience able to offer to the older people in my life. And I think that that's so important.
Beautiful. Whereas I just cry every time we talk about it. We felt it was really important to remind people this book isn't just for women 50 plus, because all older women start out as young girls.
Such a simple idea, isn't it? But it was like an aha moment, because I think we have this idea that you're young and then you're old, but it's a continuum, and we can set ourselves up for better aging. We can there are decisions we can make along the way as younger women to put ourselves in a better position as older women. And, we dedicated this book to your daughter, Talia, to my niece, Leela, that younger generation, because I think that the sooner that you start thinking about what you want your whole life to look like, those last decades to look like, the younger that you are when you read this book, the better position you will be in to make sure that you're in a safe, healthy, and dignified place in those last decades.
I want older women who read this book to know they have the power to determine the rest of their life, just as I want younger women to read this and know that they have the power to determine the rest of their life. And those decisions that they make at whatever point, and even if they continually do them along the way, have such wide repercussions. So, yeah, take that power in both hands and hold on to it tight.
Absolutely. And that comes back again to the idea of the relationship between generations and that mentoring and mentee relationship, that we have to be exchanging information, and not just as older women imparting what we've come to know to younger generations, but being open to what we can still learn from the next generation, like TikTok.
Sorry, what? But don't you think, I feel like at the end of it, we recognized how incredible it is. Aging is amazing. As we say, it's better than the alternative. But there are so many fabulous things that can come from it that maybe at the time you don't see. It's about having that moment to stop and recognize what you've learnt, who you are, what your purpose is, what you've achieved in your life, what you want to do going forward. You've got nothing to lose. If anything, it's a really empowering time in a woman's life where she can bring all of those factors together that's made her who she is and run with it.
I mean, I feel like we're having the time of our lives right now. I wouldn't be 20 again for all the tea in China. I don't know about you, but I'm excited. And I think it's because of the gift of being able to hear the stories of the women that we've talked to. I mean, hundreds of women that we've spoken to for this book. And after every single one of those conversations, I feel fuel in my tank, wind in my sails for that next decade, that next 2, 3, 4 decades. And I look back on, my younger years, my teens, my 20s, my 30s, and I'm proud of things that I've accomplished, or I, look back and laugh or maybe cringe at some of the fashion, but I wouldn't go back. I'm right where I want to be. It's exciting to get older.
And I think she's beautiful. It'd make a really gorgeous Christmas gift.
Mother's Day. Yes, absolutely. I think that, we should be buying this for our husbands, for our fathers, for our sons. Men need to understand what the women in their lives are experiencing as well.
Yeah. I think we hope this will be that valuable resource for women where it just answers a lot of questions and it gives you a lot of information and it gives you a lot of checklists to think about. I remember when we spoke to an expert about retirement and they said that it's one of the things we plan the least. We plan our careers, we plan when we're going to have families, we plan where we're going to live and what house we're going to buy, but we often don't plan our retirement until suddenly it's right there in front of us. So I think it's hopefully a really valuable resource with a lot of things to think about and navigate the path so it's a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I think that, it should really come with a little set of Post-it notes because I think that it's a book that you want to come back to. It's a book that's meant to be revisited. What's that hormone that could be wreaking havoc with my mood today? Come back and read it. What is that checklist about, retirement and talking to my employer? Come back to it. Yeah. So there's beautiful stories to absorb from the lives of other women, but also just that fundamental, resourceful information that, we come to when we need it, when it's relevant.
We're so grateful to the women who shared their stories. Many of them won't be known to our readers, women who've experienced homelessness, death of a loved one, loss of employment, but then women whose names are known who share their stories. Julia Morris, oh my gosh, she's so funny, talking about menopause, and Kathy Lett talking about her experiences. Julie Bishop shares with us when she talks about power. Paulina Poroskova, oh my gosh, one of the biggest, international supermodels, who talks about the feeling of invisibility and that she is going through that. And she's really honest in sharing her story. So I think we're just so grateful to so many women who really were vulnerable and talking about how they felt about getting older, the good and the bad.
Absolutely. Rhoda Roberts, I got so much from her story. She is a, real mover and shaker in the Sydney arts scene, a screenwriter and actor, and was a twin. And she tragically lost her twin sister when they were in their 20s. And her perspective on aging is just so poignant. That idea that the privilege of aging when you've left someone behind is so powerful and such an important reminder that we need to be celebrating every year that we get, not lamenting every new wrinkle that might come with that or every new gray hair.
It was actually a really fluid process writing this together. And now that I read it over, I actually can't work out I can't remember who wrote which bits, because I feel like we both brought so many different views to each topic. It was actually a really nice organic process, wasn't it? Like you went away and wrote some chapters and I went away and wrote others, and then we just morphed them like beautiful ingredients in a cake and voila.
Absolutely. I think that we really leaned on each other's skill sets. There were certain chapters, I think, that came more naturally to one of us than the other. But then at the end of the day, it was sharing a brain, making sure that we were across each other's writing so that we could present a really seamless, fluid voice. And I think we really achieved that. And it was a lot of fun writing with you.
It was good. Well, that's why we worked so well together. I remember when we were on the road traveling when we worked on Sunday night, and you always said if we're in the country that you had to drive on the left-hand side, that was my role, and if we're in a country where you drive on the right-hand side, that was your role. But we kind of made it work. So I feel like this one is we lent into topics that resonated with each of us. There was certain things. Empty nester, that was something I was living at the time and I was really passionate about writing about. There were other topics in here that just meant so much to you.
Absolutely. I think any collaborative process, anytime that you're working in a partnership to create something, you have to find those points of personal connection. I think that the conversations that you and I had around every single topic in this book comes through. And we knew when to lean on each other's skills or each other's experiences. Like you say, what we were actually living through in the moment comes through in this book.
It was actually a really wonderful collaborative process, wasn't it?
Hardy Grant were incredible. We had the most wonderful group of women and collaborators. They listened to us. They understood what we were trying to create. And this book is the culmination of our vision and then some. It's everything we hoped it would be. And that was because of the team effort. How to Age Against the Machine. We really hope you enjoy it. It's an empowering guide for women aging on their own terms.
It's available in bookstores, or you can get it on our website, ageagainstthemachine.com.au. And yeah, we hope you love it.